Mrs. Cuomo, Mrs. Thompson, distinguished members and friends of the Abraham Lincoln Association. This is an extraordinary evening for us, and I think you will agree with that assessment when the evening is finished. In 1859, in October of 1859, Abraham Lincoln was invited by the Reverend Henry Ward Beecher to visit his Plymouth church in Brooklyn to deliver a learned lecture. Lincoln accepted. Lincoln had just then begun going out on the lecture circuit, but was having a tough time of it. The lectures weren't selling. Indeed, one evening had to be canceled because the audience was so sparse. We don't have that problem tonight. After Lincoln's acceptance, the Chicago Tribune in January of 1860 proclaimed that Lincoln ought to be the Republican candidate for the presidency of the United States. And this hitherto little-known dark horse began to canter to the outer reaches of the political meadows. He made the journey to New York City in February of 1860. By that time, excited by his coming, sponsorship of the speech had passed from the hands of the Reverend Beecher to the Young Men's Central Republican Union. Thus, Lincoln's famous Cooper Union speech, his first major appearance in New York City from the prairies of Illinois, just 2 weeks hence from tonight. And while that Cooper Union speech is most often remembered for the tumultuous reception that it received and the blossoming of Abraham Lincoln upon the national political scene, tonight is not about presidential politics. So I wanted to extract one of Lincoln's phrases from the middle of that speech. You've all heard the ending about right makes might. But a paragraph higher in that speech is something that reminds me very much of my brother Cuomo. And so I wanted to quote from it tonight. Abraham Lincoln said, "Then let us stand by our duty fearlessly and effectively. Let us be diverted by none of those sophistical contrivances wherewith we are all so industriously plied and belabored. Contrivances such as groping for some middle ground between the right and the wrong. Vain as the search for a man who should be neither a living man nor a dead man. Such as a policy of don't care on a question about which all true men do care." In 1984, Governor Cuomo and I occasionally dueled by television on the presidential election, he with one candidate and I with another. But anyone who has watched his career in New York, and especially his stewardship of that state as its governor, understands that Governor Cuomo is a man who cares, and cares deeply. I've noticed lately a number of coincidences between the Prairie State and the Empire State. Reading Governor Cuomo's State of the State speech this year, we learned that in New York they now believe that work is better than welfare. Governor Cuomo said that, to great response. We believe that in Illinois too, which is why we started Project Chance. Governor Cuomo has a program called Rebuild New York. We have a program called Build Illinois. But what Governor Cuomo does not know, perhaps, is that the true father of that program is Abraham Lincoln, who in the 1835 session of the Illinois General Assembly as a freshman representative managed to get introduced a bill called the Internal Improvements Act for Illinois. At a time when the state treasury held a surplus of $2,000, Abraham Lincoln proposed spending $7 million to internally improve Illinois. He introduced a second act as well, one to move the capital of Illinois from Vandalia in Fayette County to Springfield in Sangamon County. But he didn't have the votes. So the Internal Improvement Act went back from the floor of the House into committee and came out as a $10 million program to improve Illinois. And the bill to move the capital from Vandalia to Springfield passed. Governor, this is a company town, so this audience should know that in addition to being the governor of the state of New York, you were at one time its Secretary of State and Lieutenant Governor. And you don't have to worry about ethnicity in Illinois. We celebrate ethnicity. We prize ethnicity. We value it. In fact, in 1976, Governor, we elected the first Swedish American as the governor of Illinois, and we've kept him ever since. Now, I wasn't quite sure how a Republican governor of Illinois should describe Governor Cuomo, because I could get into a whole lot of political trouble. So I decided I would quote somebody else. And I reached out for the latest quotation about Governor Cuomo that I could find from another Republican. His name is Malcolm Forbes. And he said last week in Forbes magazine, "Not since Hubert Humphrey has a political heart beat with such genuine compassion, but he combines deep caring with a sound concern for New York's burdened taxpayers. The icing on the Cuomo cake is the New York governor's ability to articulate the American dream, American ideals. He addresses and reaches the goodness, the decency that resides in the souls of his countrymen." Of course, Malcolm Forbes went on to say that Governor Cuomo's views about President Reagan were baloney. But I suspect if offered the choice between the whole commentary or none, Governor Cuomo would take the baloney and the whole loaf, cut it up, and make a lot of sandwiches. Governor Cuomo might not have been here this evening if his earlier career had not been cut short. He once played baseball with the Pittsburgh Pirates, that illustrious career being cut short by injury. But then if he had been with the Pittsburgh Pirates, he would have finished last in the National League last year. And I don't believe that Governor Cuomo intends to finish last in any National League. But then this is not about presidential politics this evening. Governor, last week I got a letter from one of my constituents, a really dear lady by the name of Gertrude Farmer from Joliet, who wrote a card to me thanking me for remembering her 80th birthday. And at the end of the card, she gave me some advice. I'm not ready for the advice yet, but perhaps you may be, and so I'm going to pass it on to you. It says, "Dear Governor, you'd better hurry if you're going to be our President of U.S. The years go very fast. Like a roller coaster, go slowly to the top and then go very fast down. No time to lose. From 70 on, it's downhill." But then this evening is not about presidential politics. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor and pleasure to present to you the great governor of the Empire State, Mario Cuomo.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Thompson, Mrs. Cuomo, Reverend Milkman, all the distinguished guests on the dais, and Governor Jim Thompson. I like baloney, Jim. I enjoyed your remarks. And I thank you for that. I thank you for that very, very generous introduction. It's a real privilege for me and Matilda and Christopher to be in your great state, and we appreciate your taking the time to be here to introduce me. I'd also like to thank Judge Harlington Wood for inviting me to be part of this celebration of one of the monumental figures of our history, whose words and life and legend have been, for me, as they have, I'm sure, for you, an instruction and an inspiration for most of a lifetime. I'm also honored to be in the company of Representative Dick Durbin, who occupies the congressional seat that Lincoln held, and one of the Senate's most distinguished individuals, Paul Simon, who is himself an extraordinary success story. A man of great intellect, and maybe even more significant, a man of enormous integrity whose distinguished works on the Lincoln theme have illuminated the man that we honor tonight. It is an intimidating thing to stand here tonight to talk about the greatest intellect, the greatest leader, perhaps the greatest soul America has ever produced. To follow such legendary orators as William Jennings Bryan and Adlai Stevenson. Only a struggling student myself, to face as imposing an audience of Lincoln scholars as has been assembled in this country. Lincoln scholars, tough-minded, demanding, harsh critics, highly intelligent, and to face so many Republicans, tough-minded, demanding, harsh critics. And I certainly wasn't encouraged after I learned that when another New York Governor, Franklin Roosevelt, announced his intention to come here to speak on Lincoln, a local political stalwart threatened him with an injunction. And to be honest with you, I feel a little like the Illinois man from the One Lincoln story, which I'm sure you recall, when he was confronted by a local citizens committee with the prospect of being tarred and feathered and run out of town on a rail. He announced, "If it weren't for the honor of the thing, I'd just as soon it happened to someone else." And I should, if I can take the risk of being terribly serious, tell you one more thing before I go on with my formal remarks. It would be foolish to try to deny that there has been, despite what Jim Thompson has said, there has been some speculation surrounding this event and some others recently about ambitions for the presidency. And let me be candid, I don't know anyone who would regard it as anything less than the highest possible political privilege to be president. And governors are perhaps better prepared than some others to be president. After all, governors like Teddy Roosevelt and FDR, and even governors from places like Georgia and California. And it's particularly true that governors of great industrial states who have reasonably good records. And that's because probably governors are regarded as better equipped than most because they do more than make speeches. They have to make budgets, and they have to run things, and that's what presidents do. So the truth is, despite what might be said about planning to run again for governor, the speculation about the presidency is plausible. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if the election goes well this year for him, if early next year you heard a declaration of interest from a re-elected governor of a large state, Jim Thompson. This is an event beyond the scope of partisan politics. When Lincoln gave his one and only speech in my capital, Albany, New York, he told the Democratic governor, "You have invited and received me without distinction of party." If I may, let me second that sentiment now and thank you for inviting me and receiving me in the same spirit. To be here in Springfield instead of at the memorial in Washington to celebrate this high holy day of Lincoln remembrance gives us a special advantage. In Washington, Lincoln towers far above us, presiding magisterially in a marble temple. His stony composure, the hugeness of him there, gives him and his whole life a grandeur that places him so far above and beyond us that it's difficult to remember the reality of him. We have lifted Lincoln to the very pinnacle of our national memory, enlarged him to gargantuan proportions in white stone recreations. We've chiseled his face on the side of a mountain, making him appear as a voice in the heavens. And there's a danger when we enshrine our heroes, when we lift them onto pedestals and lay wreaths at their feet. We can, by the very process of elevating them, strain the sense of connection between them and the palpable, fleshy, sometimes mean concerns of our own lives. It would be a terrible shame to lose Lincoln that way, to make of him a celebration but not an instruction, a memory but not a model, a legend but not a lesson. And here in Springfield, there's less chance of that. Although he left Springfield 125 years ago, here where he practiced law, served as a legislator, and warned this nation of the dangers of a house divided, Lincoln the man still presides. Here we can remember that Lincoln, the miracle that we call Lincoln, worked within the hard, sometimes discouraging, sometimes terrifying limits of time and place and chance. And by our so remembering him, he can again begin to light our minds and move our hearts. And that's why I've come here, not just to light a candle to the apparition of him, but to remember his specific wisdom and goodness and to consider how it can continue to touch us, to teach us, to move us to the higher ground. I've come to remember Lincoln as he was, the flesh and blood man haunted by mortality in his waking and his dreaming life, the boy who had been uprooted from one frontier farm to another, across Kentucky and Indiana and Illinois by a father restless with his own dreams. To remember some of Lincoln's own words, which taken all together are the best words that America has ever produced. To remember the words that he spoke 10 days after his lyrical, wrenching farewell to Springfield on his way to his inauguration as our 16th president. "Back in my childhood," he said then, "the earliest days of my being able to read, I got hold of a small book, Weems's Life of Washington. I remember all the accounts there given of the battlefields and struggles for the liberties of the country, and the great hardships of that time fixed themselves on my memory. I recollect thinking then, boy even though I was, that there must have been something more than common that those men struggled for. And I am exceedingly anxious that the thing which they struggled for, that something even more than national independence, that something that held out a promise to all the people of the world for all time to come, shall be perpetuated in accordance with the original idea for which the struggle was made." Here was Lincoln, just before his inauguration, reminding us of the source of his strength and eventual greatness, his compelling need to understand the meaning of things and to commit to a course that was directed by reason, supported by principle, designed to achieve the greatest good. He was a man of ideas, grand and soaring ones, and he was cursed by the realization that they were achievable ideas as well, so that he could not escape the obligation of pursuing them despite the peril and the pain that pursuit would inevitably bring. Even as a boy, he grasped the great idea that would sustain him and provoke him for the rest of his days. the idea that took hold of his heart and his mind, the idea that he tells us about again and again throughout his life. It became the thread of purpose that tied the boy to the man to the legend. The great idea, the dream, the achievable dream of equality, of opportunity for all. The original idea for which the struggle was made. The proposition that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, even by Lincoln's time, for many, the words had been heard often enough so that they became commonplace, part of the intellectual and historical landscape, losing their dimension, their significance, their profoundness, but not for Lincoln. He pondered them. He troubled over their significance. He wrestled with their possibilities. We did not learn quickly or easily that all men are created equal, one Lincoln scholar has observed. No, we did not learn those words quickly or easily. We are still struggling with them, in fact, as Lincoln did for a whole lifetime. From the time he read Weems's little book until the day he was martyred, he thought and planned and prayed to make the words of the Declaration a way of life. Equality and opportunity for all, but truly for all. Lincoln came to believe that the great promise of the Founding Fathers was one that had only begun to be realized with the Founding Fathers themselves. He understood that from the beginning it was a promise that would have to be fulfilled in degrees. Its embrace would have to be widened over the years, step by step, sometimes painfully, until finally it included everyone. That was his dream. That was his vision, and that was his mission. And with it, he defined for himself and for us the soul of our unique experiment in government, the belief that the promise of the Declaration of Independence, the promise of equality and opportunity, cannot be considered kept until it includes everyone. And for him, that was the unifying principle of our democracy. Without it, we had no nation worth fighting for. And with it, we had no limit to the good that we might achieve. He spent the rest of his life trying to give the principle meaning. He consumed himself doing it. He reaffirmed Jefferson's preference for the human interest and the human right. The principles of Jefferson, he said, are the definitions and axioms of free society. But Lincoln extended those instincts to new expressions of equality. And always he searched for ways to bring within the embrace of the new freedom, the new opportunity, all who had become Americans. Deeply, indeed reverently grateful for the opportunity afforded him, he was pained by the idea that it should be denied others or limited. He believed that the human right was more than just the right to exist, to live free from oppression. He believed it included the right to achieve, to thrive. So he reached out for what he called the penniless beginner. He thought it the American promise that every poor man should be given his chance. He saw what others would or could not see, the immensity of the fundamental ideas of freedom and self-determination that made his young nation such a radically new adventure in government. But he was not intimidated by that immensity. He was willing to use the ideas as well as to admire them, to mold them so as to apply them to new circumstances, to wield them as instruments of justice and not just echoes of it. And some in his time said government should do no more than protect its people from insurrection and foreign invasion and spend the rest of its time dispassionately observing the way its people played out the cards that fate had dealt them. He scorned that view. He called it a do-nothing abdication of responsibility by government. The legitimate object of government, he said, is to do for people what needs to be done, but which they cannot, by individual effort, do at all or do so well for themselves. There are many such things, he said. And so he offered the poor more than freedom and the encouragement of his own good example. He offered them government that would work aggressively to help them find the chance they might not have found alone. He did it by fighting for bridges and railroad construction and other such projects that others decried as excessive government. He gave help for education, help for agriculture, land for the rural family struggling for a start. And always at the heart of his struggle and his yearning was the passion to make room for the outsider, the insistence upon a commitment to respect the idea of equality by fighting for inclusion. Early in his career, he spoke out for women's suffrage. His contempt for the do-nothings was equaled by his disdain for the know-nothings. America, of course, beckoned foreigners, but many Americans, organized around the crude selfishness of the nativist movement, rejected foreigners. The nativists sought to create two classes of people, the old stock Americans and the intruders from other places, keeping the intruders forever strangers in a strange land. Lincoln shamed them with his understanding and his strength. "I am not a know-nothing," he said. "How could I be? How can anyone who abhors the oppression of Negroes be in favor of degrading classes of white people?" As a nation, we began by declaring, "All men are created equal." We now practically read it, "All men are created equal except Negroes." When the know-nothings get control, it will read, "All men are created equal except Negroes and Catholics and foreigners." And then he added, "When it comes to this, I shall prefer emigrating to some country where they make no pretense of loving liberty, to Russia, for instance, where despotism can be taken pure and without the base alloy of hypocrisy." Now, had Lincoln not existed, or had he been less than he was and the battle to keep the nation together had been lost, it would have meant the end of the American experiment. Secession would have bred secession, reducing us into smaller and smaller fragments until finally we were just the broken pieces of the dream. Lincoln saved us from that. But winning the great war for unity did not preserve us from the need to fight further battles in the struggle to balance our diversity with our harmony, to keep the pieces of the mosaic intact, even while making room for new pieces. And that work is today, as it was in 1863, still an unfinished work, still a cause that requires a full measure of devotion. For more than 100 years, the fight to include has continued. In the struggle to free working people from the oppression of a ruthless economic system that saw women and children work to death, and more men born to poverty, live in poverty, and die in poverty in spite of working all the while. In the continuing fight for civil rights, making Lincoln's promise real. In the effort to keep the farmer alive. In the ongoing resistance to preserve religious freedom from the arrogance of the know-nothing and the zealotry of those who would make their religion the state's religion. In the crusade to make women equal legally and practically. And over this time, many battles have been won. And the embrace of our unity has been gradually but inexorably expanded. But Lincoln's work is not yet done. A century after Lincoln preached his answer of equality and mutual respect, some discrimination, some little discrimination of class or race or sex or ethnicity, as a bar to full participation in America, may still remain. Certainly unpleasant reminders of less enlightened times linger. Sometimes they're heard in whispers, at other times loud enough to capture the attention of the American people. I've had my own encounter with this question, and I've spoken of it. Like millions of others, I'm privileged to be a first-generation American. My mother and father came to this country more than 60 years ago with nothing but their hopes, without education or skills or wealth. And through the opportunity given them here to lift themselves through hard work, they were able to raise a family. My mother has lived to see her youngest child become chief executive of one of the greatest states in the greatest nation in the only world we know. Like millions of other children of immigrants, I know the strength that immigrants can bring. I know the richness of a society that allows us a whole new culture without requiring us to surrender the one our parents were born to. I know the miraculous power of this place that helps people rise up from poverty to security and even affluence in the course of a single lifetime, with generations of other children of the immigrants. I know about equality and opportunity and unity in a special way. And I know how from time to time all this beauty can be challenged by the misguided children of the know-nothings, by the short-sighted and the unkind, by contempt that masks itself as humor, by all the casual or conscious bigotry that must keep the American people vigilant. We heard such voices again recently, saying things like, Italians are not politically popular, Catholics will have a problem, he has an ethnic problem. An ethnic problem. And we heard the word again. WAP. We oftentimes refer to people of Italian descent as WAPs, said one public figure, unabashedly. Now, given the unbroken string of opportunity and good fortune that has been provided me by this great country, I might simply have ignored these references. Plenty of people have. I could easily have let the words pass as inconsequential, especially remembering Lincoln himself, the object of scorn and ridicule. But the words took on significance because they were heard far beyond my home or my block or even my state, because they were heard by others who remembered times of their own when words stung and menaced them and their people. And more importantly, because they raised a question about our system of fundamental American values that Lincoln helped construct and died for. Is it true? Are there really so many who have never heard Lincoln's voice or the sweet sound of reason and fairness, so many who do not understand the beauty and power of this place that they could make of the tint of your skin or the sex you were born to or the vowels of your name an impediment to progress in this, the land of opportunity? Is it true? I believe the answer would be clear. So I asked for it by disputing the voices of division, and by saying it isn't so. It is the voice of ignorance, and I challenge you to show me otherwise. And in no time at all, the answer has come back from the American people. Everywhere, everyone's saying the same things. Of course, it's wrong to judge a person by the place where his forebears came from. Of course, that would violate all that we stand for, fairness and common sense. It shouldn't even have been brought up. It shouldn't even have been a cause for discussion. And I agree. It should not have been, but it was. And the discussion is now concluded with the answer I was sure of and the answer I am proud of as an American, the answer Lincoln would have given. You will rise or fall on your merits as a person and the quality of your work, and all else is distraction. Lincoln believed, with every fiber of his being, that this place, America, could offer a dream to all mankind different than any other in the annals of history, more generous, more compassionate, more inclusive. No one knew better than Lincoln our sturdiness, the ability of most of us to make it on our own given the chance. But at the same time, no one knew better than Lincoln the idea of family, the idea that unless we helped one another, there were some who would never make it. One person climbs the ladder of personal ambition, reaches his dream, and then turns and pulls the ladder up. Another reaches the place he has sought, turns, and reaches down for the person behind him. With Lincoln, it was that process of turning and reaching down, that commitment to keep lifting people up the ladder which defined the American character, stamping us forever with a mission that reached even beyond our borders to embrace the entire world. Lincoln's belief in America, in the American people, was broader and deeper, more daring than any other person's of his age, and perhaps ours too. And this is the near unbelievable greatness of the man, that with that belief, he not only led us, he created us. His personal mythology became our national mythology. It is as if Homer not only chronicled the siege of Troy, but conducted the siege as well, as if Shakespeare set aside his playwriting to lead the English against the Armada himself, because Lincoln embodied his age in his actions and in his words. Words, even and measured, hurrying across 3 decades, calling us to our destiny. Words that he prayed and troubled over, more than 1 million words in his speeches and writings. Words that chronicled the search for his own identity as he searched for a nation's identity. Words that were by turns as chilling as the night sky and as assuring as home. words his reason sharpened into steel and his heart softened into an embrace, words filled with all the longings of his soul and of his century, words wrung from his private struggle, spun to capture the struggle of a nation, words out of his own pain to heal that struggle, words of retribution but never of revenge, words that judged but never condemned, words that pleaded, cajoled for the one belief that the promise must be kept, that the dream must endure and grow until it embraces everyone. Words ringing down into the present, all the hope and the pain of that epic caught somehow by his magic cadences. The tearing away, the binding together, the leaving behind, the reaching beyond. As individuals, as a people, we're still reaching up for a better job, a better education, a better society, even for the stars, just as Lincoln did. But because of Lincoln, we do it in a way that is unique to this world. What other people on earth have ever claimed a quality of character that resided not in a way of speaking or dressing or dancing or even praying, but in an idea? What other people on earth have ever refused to set the definitions of their identity by anything other than that idea? No, we've not learned quickly or easily that the dream of America endures only so long as we keep faith with the struggle to include. But Lincoln, through his words and his works, has etched that message forever into our consciousness. Lincoln showed us for all time what unites us. He taught us that we cannot rest until the promise of equality and opportunity embraces every region, every race, every religion, every nationality, and every class, until it includes the penniless beginner and the poor man seeking his chance. In his time, Lincoln saw that as long as 1 in every 7 Americans was enslaved, our identity as a people was hostage to that enslavement. He faced that injustice. He fought it. He gave his life to see it righted. Time and again since then, we've had to face challenges that threaten to divide us. And time again, we've conquered them. We've reached out, hesitantly sometimes, but always we've reached out to include impoverished immigrants, the farmer and the factory worker, women and the disabled. To all those whose only assets were their great expectations, America found ways to meet those expectations and to create new ones. Generations of hard-working people moved into the middle class and beyond because of America. We created a society as open and free as any on earth, and we did it Lincoln's way, by founding that society on a belief in the boundless enterprise of the American people. Always we have extended the promise, moving toward the light, toward our declared purpose as a people, to form a more perfect union, to overcome all that divides us because we believe the ancient wisdom that Lincoln believed. A house divided against itself cannot stand. And step by step, our embrace grows wider. The old bigotries seem to be dying. The old stereotypes and hatreds that denied so many their full share of an America they helped build have gradually given way to acceptance and fairness and civility. But still, great challenges remain. Suddenly, ominously, a new one has emerged. In Lincoln's time, 1 of every 7 Americans was a slave. Today, for all of our affluence and might, despite what every day is described as our continuing economic recovery, nearly 1 in every 7 Americans lives in poverty. Not in chains, because Lincoln saved us from that, but trapped in a cycle of despair that is its own enslavement. Today, while so many of us do so well, 1 of every 2 minority children is born poor. Many of them to be oppressed for a lifetime by inadequate education and the suffocating influence of broken families and social disorientation. Our identity as a people is hostage to the grim facts of more than 33 million Americans for whom equality and opportunity is not yet an attainable reality, but only an illusion. Now, some people look at these statistics and the suffering people behind them and deny them, pretending instead that we are all one great shining city on a hill. Lincoln told us for a lifetime, and Lincoln told us for all time to come, that there can be no shining city when 1 in 7 of us is denied the promise of the Declaration. He tells us today that we are justly proud of all that we have accomplished, but that for all of our progress, for all of our achievement, for all that so properly makes us proud, we have no right to rest content, nor justification for turning from the effort out of fear or lack of confidence. We have met greater challenges with fewer resources. We have faced greater perils with fewer friends. It would be a desecration of our belief and an act of ingratitude for the good fortune that we have had to end the struggle for inclusion because it's over for some of us. So this evening, we come to pay you our respects, Mr. Lincoln, not just by recalling your words and revering your memory, which we do humbly and with great pleasure. This evening, we offer you more, Mr. President. We offer you what you have asked us for, a continuing commitment to live your truth, to go forward painful step by painful step, enlarging the greatness of this nation with patient confidence in the ultimate justice of the people. Because as you have told us, Mr. President, there is no better or equal hope in the world. Thank you.
Outstanding, Governor.
Governor Cuomo, this audience, I think you can see, has tried to repay your eloquence with the eloquence of their applause. I think it'll be a long time before all of us assembled here forget. I think we will remember always that 2 great governors, 2 great states came together to help us honor Abraham Lincoln. And we don't want you to forget us either, Governor Cuomo, so we have something for you tonight. We have this bust of Abraham Lincoln, inscribed to you. I think you will appreciate it even more if you know that it was sculptured by a man who was born in New York. Thomas Dow Jones. Mr. Lincoln sat for this statue in Springfield. Well, that's New York for you, I guess. But we'll get that fixed, and we have the story of the bust here, and Ralph Newman has made this presentation possible, as has the Abraham Lincoln Association and everybody who is here.